Hey everyone, I am pro photographer Ian Plant, and today we have a special guest on. We've had him on before. This is Sean Bagshaw, who is one of my favorite photographers and a good friend of Photomasters. Sean, welcome so much to Photomasters Live.
Thanks, Ian. It's great to be here. Always enjoy having a chat with you.
Oh, it's always great talking with you as well. And so it's been a while since we've had you on. So I wanted to start off by asking, what have you been up to in the past year or two?
Well, it's a fun life. I've been out doing all kinds of things, both photographically, work-wise, and just I enjoy photographing, not work-related as well, but lots of other stuff going on in life as well. So I've been on, some good trips recently. Just in this year, I've been to Japan and northern Norway and way far out in the Eastern Oregon desert and to the coast on the Oregon coast. But I've also been doing a lot of hiking and backpacking and bike riding stuff I always do, skiing in the winter. And the last couple summers, I've taken up a sport called wing foiling, and that really takes up a lot of my leisure time, and it's something I really enjoy doing. It's been just a blast.
Oh, well, that sounds like a lot of fun. And so let me ask you this: so during the summer, you haven't been doing much photography. You've been, kind of chasing other interests. Is that like a creative decision? Do you like taking a break from your photography every now and then, or what's going on there?
I do like taking a break from photography. I think that's something that I've kind of always done, even back when I was young and hungry and, super motivated photographically. I would still go sometimes weeks or months without getting the camera out. Um, I find that, yeah, I don't necessarily feel like I need to be photographing all the time. I think in my learning phase, I definitely was, just because I wanted to learn and accelerate the learning curve. But no, I take photographs when I feel inspired to take photographs, and if I'm not feeling it, or I have other interests in my life that are kind of taking my attention, I do that. Um, Obviously, if you produce photographs and having a volume of photographs is part of your business, something you do professionally, then you've got to keep creating the content like that. My photography business, for at least the last 15 years, has not really been about creating a lot of photos. I stopped doing commercial photography back then. It's more around teaching. And so the photography that I do is either personal or it relates to the teaching that I'm doing. So I don't have the pressure to create a lot of content. And which is great, because then if I'm not taking photographs, I'm doing other things. I don't feel bad about that. And I think it's good for my mental health and my creativity. When I do go take photos, it just, I'm much more into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is value to taking a creative break or doing a creative reset, but I personally find it very difficult when I'm not engaging in the photographic process. Like if I go an extended period of time and I'm not making any photos, I start getting antsy, and it really bothers me. So I rarely go more than a few days without trying something, and a lot of times it's just a waste of time. Like I'm not making any good work. I'm just trying to force myself to be creative. So many years ago, my good friend and mentor, George Stocking, early in my career, told me something that I think infects my view even today. He said, "You're only as good as the last photo you've taken." And I mean, I think what he was trying to get at here was that you've got to constantly be producing good work to stay relevant. And so I don't know, maybe that's kind of a toxic view and maybe I've internalized that. And as a result, I can't take creative breaks, but it sounds like you're not encumbered by that at all.
Well, I know, I mean, I've known you and your photography for a long time, Ian, and that's something that I always am so impressed by you, is your work ethic and your commitment, and it shows in your work. I mean, your body of work is just incredible. It's always fresh. You have, it's amazing perspective on so many, and in so many different types of photography and from all around the world. And yeah, so that shows through in your work that you are doing that you're out there always trying to take photos, find the new thing or just continue to keep yourself fresh in it. Um, yeah, I've had that in the past, but I think I definitely, at least now, it's much more recreational for me, and I really enjoy it. But I would certainly say that, um, yeah, I don't think my body of work, to look at it, I enjoy it. It's fine, but yeah, I don't know that I'm really pushing any boundaries personally anymore. I just go out and have fun.
Well, I beg to differ about that. I mean, I've always really admired your work. And one thing that I've always liked about it is that you seem to have this intuitive sense for creating meaningful compositions. And so maybe part of the reason why I work so hard is because I have to keep up with people like you who just it comes naturally to you. And so I thought maybe we would take a look at some of the photos that you've been making recently and maybe have you comment on a few of them and talk about what it is you were trying to achieve with each of these photos. We don't have to talk about each and every one of them, but I would like to talk about a few of them. And so let's just start off with this one. You shared with me some of your recent work, and this is an interesting view of a waterfall. What I like about this is that you intentionally put something between you, the camera lens or the viewer's perspective, and the subject that you're photographing, the waterfall in the background. And it seems to me that it just gives the photo a bit more depth and visual interest. Tell us a little bit about this photo and what it was you were trying to accomplish artistically to get this shot.
This is Silver Falls State Park in Oregon, and it's a place I've been many times and photographed a lot, and it gets photographed quite often. It's a beautiful place. I can't remember how many waterfalls there are there. But this time I was hiking with the camera, but I didn't have anything really, intention of what kind of photo I was going to make. I love to just walk through, especially in these kind of forest settings, and just kind of see what you see. And as I walked along, I just caught this glimpse of this little window between two trees. It was really tight. There wasn't any good open views to the waterfall. And this is something that I think a lot of people hiking around trying to find more of a obvious view through the forest wouldn't even notice. It was this really small little gap between the trees. And for whatever reason, because I was taking my time and just noticing things, I saw it and saw that things lined up. And I just really liked it because it's those kinds of things that I enjoy finding in the landscape, little really small opportunities for photography that aren't obvious. And a lot of times they don't work out. You chase rabbits and spend a lot of time trying to create a photo that doesn't quite come together. But in that process of hunting and searching and experimenting and trying things, every once in a while you get one where everything does kind of line up to create a photo. And so I felt like I created a photo from this place that a lot of people visit that I think most people wouldn't even necessarily know that's where this is, not recognize it. And I think if I went back there and hiked that same trail, I doubt I would maybe even find this little slot between the trees again. Yeah. So I nothing grand in terms of what I was trying to do, other than I was excited to find it. Everything, the light, that little branch on the left there, and the way the light was coming in, just it was something new and different, and I was excited to find it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I like to say that photography is all about showing people something that they haven't seen before. And I emphasize that that doesn't necessarily mean showing them something that literally hasn't been seen, something completely new. I think it just really means finding a new way of seeing things that people might already be familiar with and showing them a view that they wouldn't think of seeing. And, contrast that photo with this photo. This is more, I think, traditional. When people think of landscape photos, they think of this, open expanse, wide open scene. And in the previous photo, I think you were showing something that isn't as traditional and therefore is a new way of looking at things for most people. But tell us a little bit about this. Where is this photo taken?
So this is in the Highlands in Iceland. Somewhere I was traveling with a group of photographer friends, and we were with our friend, and you maybe know him. Do you know Thor the Viking from Iceland?
No, I don't. Well, I
Thor.
mean, I know a few Thors from
Oh,
Iceland, but not necessarily the specific Thor you're referencing.
I think Thor Johnson. He leads photo tours in Iceland. Anyways, great guy. Knows obviously grew up in Iceland, lived there all his life. Knows the high country, really well. So it was great to be with him, and we were just going where he said to go. And this is just a spot that we, found it, or stopped along the side of a Jeep road, and then hiked out across the 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 landscape there, and found this little stream with the mountain in the background, and all the elements just kind of came together. We had kind of the moody sky with the late day light coming through a little gap in the clouds, this great stream through this wonderfully green grass and moss, and a couple little of the little pom pom grass or whatever they're called in the foreground, and this kind of foreboding mountain in the background. Yeah, like you said, classic landscape scene, and the light was great, and so you just take the obvious photo.
Yeah, it's a very soft light look, which I like very much, and it's something that I see a lot in your work, that you're not afraid to play around with the more subtle moments. And this photo really stood out to me because there's I've seen a lot of photographs of sunbeams coming through the fog in the redwoods, and I kind of felt like I had some really good photos from this place, and that I was kind of on the top. But then I saw this photo and realized I'm no longer on the top for those redwood photos. I really like this, and I really like the branch that you included in the foreground. I think that really creates some great visual interest here. That very strong S curve leading through the scene, and even though it kind of obscures the view of the background, foggy trees and all the sunbeams coming through, I think it's a really dynamic composition.
Yeah, the redwoods are not too far from where I live, so I have the good fortune of being able to visit there a lot. And yeah, I guess they're just so beautiful. They're one of my favorite places to go. But like you said, there's obvious kind of big trees, and if you get good luck to have fog and sunlight coming through, you get those rays coming through the fog. And on this day, I feel like I've taken so many of those photos, and I kind of on this particular trail have standard spots where I've taken photos before, and it's easy to get stuck in that rut where you just go back to the place you've been before. So on this day, I actually was taking, I think this day I was with Albert Dross and Adam Gibbs, a couple of photographer friends of both of ours. And they'd never been to the redwoods before, and not in the fog. So they were going crazy. And I was just kind of walking around looking for something different because, yeah. And as I was walking around and I was trying to stay out of their way in kind of the more obvious photos, I looked up and just happened to see this curving rhododendron, and just the way it curved and the way the location of the sun, it all just kind of fell into place. And it was, again, another one of those kind of serendipitous situations. I just happened to look up at the right time as I was walking down the trail and thought, oh, that's something different that I haven't really noticed before. The backlight on the moss, all of that stuff just kind of came together. And it was overhead, and getting my camera into position was the trickiest part of taking this photo, because I had to extend it all the way up, maybe 7 feet high over my head. And then just kind of guess, looking at the LCD from a distance on tiptoe, that I had it lined up right. And of course the sun's moving. So the sun in that location only lasted for a minute. So yeah, it was fun. It was something different. And it was just a moment in time. I couldn't have planned it out. And I don't think I would, unless you were there just the right moment again, somehow you'd never get that photo again.
Yeah, and it really stands out to me because it is so different from so many shots that I've seen from the redwoods, so many shots that I've taken myself. And I think it gets back to what I was saying earlier. It's showing the world in a way different than the way most people see it. And it's also something that is the result, it seems to me, of your image files maturing. You've been to this location many times. And so, like a lot of times when I'm shooting, and I've been to the same place many, many times because I've led a lot of workshops there, or it just happens to be one of my go-to spots, I might start feeling a little uninspired by it. And, a lot of times I just go there and I don't take out my camera. I'm just not taking any photos. But when you force yourself in those situations, take your camera out and try to be creative and try to do something you haven't done before. That's often when you seem to have that eureka moment when you discover a new and better way of seeing things, and your artistry takes a huge step up in those moments, I think. So I think it really is the result of repetition. And, like we like to quote, there's the famous Einstein quote that maybe Einstein didn't really say, that insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But I do think that with photography, a little bit of insanity like that is a good thing.
Repetition and yeah, just continually trying things. I agree. Even if it is somewhat the same thing in photography, doing it, repetitively, if you can stay out of those kind of those creative ruts and look for new things. Yeah, I think doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is a completely rational approach in photography. And I think what I know about your photos, Ian, is that you are really good at this because I mean, I have a few handful of photos where I feel like, oh, I found, something unique or new or exciting that I hadn't really, couldn't have envisioned ahead of time. But when I look at your photos, I see that. I mean, your portfolio is so strong with those kinds of moments, and that's a lot of inspiration to me. Is the way that you find that, I think, so often. But I think it's probably also a reflection of how often you're out there doing the work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to stay creative, and, I like trying different things myself. Like I've got diversity in my portfolio just because I feel like it's important to diversify one's portfolio. And and I find that when you try something that you haven't done before, that's when you learn, and it forces you to see the world in different ways, and you can take that lesson back to the kinds of photography that you do tend to gravitate towards. And this image, I really like. I really like it because of the light, and it's a very subtle composition. And this is what I was talking about earlier. What I find about your work is that you just seem to have this intuitive sense where to put everything in the scene and set up your composition. And I kind of find that I personally struggle with composition a lot. Like I feel like I'm thinking things through too much, and when I look at a photo like this, I see that you have that intuitive sense where to put everything. So correct me if I'm wrong. Is this something that you just kind of walked up to this and you said, "Aha, I know exactly what to do here," and you set up and you nailed it? Or is this something where you had to spend a lot of time getting into the right position and figuring out a way to make everything work together?
On this one, I think once I found this spot, it kind of fell into place pretty rapidly. But prior to finding this spot, and I do this, and I think maybe you're the same, is I rarely stand in one spot very long when I'm out taking photographs. I am moving all over the place. So I'd been walking up this creek for, I mean, I had my waders on or my muck boots on and rock hopping on the slippery rocks, probably a half a mile looking for things and not finding things, and constantly just, no, that's not quite right. It's not feeling right. I've taken lots of photos um, from that stretch of the creek, but I don't know how many photos I took over a couple hour period of exploring up and down. This is the one photo out of that whole session that I really liked. And it's because I finally got to a place where the light was all working and this little cascade as a foreground element was really what grabbed me. The way the lines of the forest and the stream receded into the background, the reflections in the water lined up well. And yeah, so I kind of saw this from a distance and worked my way up to it. And then once I got there, yeah, I settled in pretty quickly. Yeah, but I'm constantly moving around and a lot of moving my head around. Like if people are with me on workshops, I'm climbing up on top of rocks. I'm getting down low on the ground. I'm trying to put my eyeballs in lots of different perspectives because sometimes just the difference of a foot or two, or even sometimes just an inch or two, up or down, left or right, forward or backward, completely changes how the scene is going to appear, in the camera frame.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with is coming to an understanding about that. Like I see it all the time. You see other photographers out there and they show up at a location, they set up their tripod, they've got their camera pretty much at eye level and they just start shooting and they never move from that one spot. And, coming up with a good perspective and a really good point of view is the key to making compelling photographs. And another key is learning how to work with light. And so I think this photo has got a really deft mastery of the use of light. A lot of people photographing streams and waterfalls are thinking about shooting on an overcast day, but for a scene like this, it really is brought to life with some sunlight. So, I'm assuming this was either early in the morning or late in the afternoon. So there's some light coming in that's backlighting the autumn foliage, and that light is being reflected down into the shadowed stream below. And it just has this wonderful golden luminous look to it.
That's exactly what I was going for. Yeah, it was clear blue skies. This was in Great Smoky Mountain National Park last fall, and clear blue skies. But I knew that in kind of some of the deep creek valleys that are in the park, that if I went right at both sunrise and sunset, actually, or right before and right after sunset and sunrise, that the angle of the sun would be low enough that it would be illuminating the trees up on the hillside above, but the deep creek valley would be in that shadow. So you'd have that, even soft lighting down below. You'd have some direct sunlight, dappled light, or spotted sunlight up above. But that would create those reflections, like you said, and kind of get a situation. Yeah, an hour or two earlier with that direct sunlight down in the creek would have been difficult. Yeah, obviously an overcast day would create a different look and could be nice as well. But without that bright reflection in the water, to me, that was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you use a polarizer filter on this?
I'm going to say yes. I don't remember exactly, but I do know that when I'm photographing in situations like this, with wet rocks and water and leaves and things like that, I'm almost always using a polarizer because I find as I turn it, the reflections change, how the wet rocks appear changes, and I never know exactly how I'm going to set the polarizer. I just kind of move it around until things look good. But at least you can change how the light is reflecting off of surfaces with the polarizer. So I almost always use it because something interesting is going to happen.
Yeah. A polarizer is a secret weapon for shots like this. And some
Yeah.
people, I think, maybe think it's counterintuitive because part of what you want to get is those really colorful reflections, and a polarizer is designed to remove those reflections. But what people need to understand is that the reflections in the scene are coming from different angles. And so the autumn foliage reflecting in the water is coming in at a different angle than glare that might be coming from the sky above. And so you can turn the polarizer to get rid of the glare on the wet rocks in the foreground, but still keep and intensify that beautiful foliage reflected in the stream in the background. So where was this taken?
This is also that same trip in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. This is just outside the park,
Uh,
and I'm not going to remember the name of the drive, but it's a drive you can take that kind of puts you up on some ridges, looking out over the mountains and over the park. And this was kind of a stormy morning, post-storm morning. Well, it wasn't really a storm, but some rain came through, so there was a lot of atmosphere. This was the morning, my last morning of that trip, and some rain did come in after all the clear skies, but it created those great layers of atmosphere and fog. And yeah, I just pulled out at a pullout and noticed the Great Valley and this little farm down in this glen, and the light and the clouds and the sun were all moving quickly, and that kind of one shaft of light was just there for a moment. So I had to really go quickly with a long lens. Is like a 500 millimeter lens, I think 100 or 500. I had to handhold it, didn't have time to set up the tripod. So I was just hoping I can handhold and keep it sharp at that focal length. And I way underexposed the photo because we had some, there were those hot highlights in the clouds. Yeah, and rattled off a bunch of photos and got lucky that one came out sharp and I had an exposure that worked. Yeah, and I just liked kind of the mood and the little tiny farm down there and this idea of, you know, humans living off the land and living in the landscape, that kind of, you know, mountains and just kind of wilderness or forest behind the farm.
So much of landscape photography is waiting for weather.
It is. It really is.
Yeah. Well, this looks to me like Japan.
This is Japan. Yeah, my one of my sons lives in Japan. He's 21 years old. He moved to Japan when he was 18, and he's learned Japanese, and he's studying music in Japan. And so we went to visit him for the first time last winter. It was January. And yeah, we were mostly there to visit him and mostly there as tourists. It wasn't really a photography trip. And when we were in Kyoto, I wanted to see some bamboo forests, and of course, this is the really famous bamboo forest right outside of Kyoto. And you see, it's become a, you know, Insta famous Instagram spot. And I
Yeah.
was just with my wife, and we were walking on the path, which was very crowded, even in January in the winter. I can't imagine it during you know, tourist season. Um, anyway, I hadn't planned to take a photo. There was kind of the Instagram spot where everyone tries to get a selfie, and but as I was walking along just with my camera around my neck, because I just take it with me just in case, there just was this one spot kind of on the rise of a little hill where looking through the bamboo and up the path that I hadn't seen before. It was something a little different. There was no one else standing around taking photos where I was to get in the way. And the path, I did have to wait. Lots of people were walking back and forth on the path. And I waited for a little while until there were fewer people, and especially this one woman with the red jacket going away from me up the path. And so I just grabbed a quick handheld photo. There were a couple other people kind of in the lower part, their heads sticking into the path there, that I was able to remove with, you know, the magic of Photoshop. And yeah, so I ended up with a photo in a very highly photographed place that I felt was something, again, a little different. And yeah, it's a beautiful scene. How could you not take a photo there?
Right. Well, telling a story is so important to effective photography. And to me, what tells the story more than anything is your choice of exposure value. So the fact that you underexposed this a little bit, and either you did that in camera or later on when you were processing the photo, it just that slightly dark exposure seems to add to the mystery here.
Yeah, I do that a lot in my photography. I think that's a common thing to do, but I really enjoy it is starting kind of with a dark exposure value and then just bringing light through in certain areas, whether that's, you know, a lot of times and in this scene, part of that's very natural. That light coming from the upper canopy was the light that was actually coming through, but then also being able to add, you know, some dodging, some light into certain areas, like in the stalks of the bamboo and on the path, to guide the eye and to really focus viewer and to create that sense of kind of, you know, this kind of enveloping dark scene with points of light that you can kind of follow with the eye and get drawn into the scene. I like that. And I usually don't include people in my photos very often. I'm a landscape photographer, not a people photographer. But in this case, you know, there was a person there, and I thought a person on that path for scale was good. And also in Japan, you know, that red color is very auspicious and protective. You know, all the Shinto and Buddhist shrines all use red, and so I felt like that red jacket really just kind of fit that theme as well.
Yeah, and I also think it's important for a photo like this to have a point of interest because you really have this uniform pattern of all the trees, and you've got a leading line formed by the path, but doesn't really lead anywhere. So having something to focus the viewer's attention, I think, is very effective for a composition like this. I just need to take a quick moment to give a shout out to our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors for their support. It helps us bring great photographers like Sean on the program. And getting back to Sean's photos, whether, I jokingly talked about how landscape photography is waiting for weather, but it's really not a joke. It really is something that we spend a lot of time doing. And to me, it's simultaneously the most interesting and exciting thing about landscape photography, and it's also the most frustrating and boring thing because you can often go to a place and just have terrible weather. And by terrible weather, I mean sunny skies, the kind of weather that tourists love, but landscape photographers hate. And so, quite often, I mean, I've had so many landscape trips where I'm there for a week or two, just waiting for some interesting weather to come in. And so that can be very frustrating. And also, it feels very unproductive to me. But what's exhilarating about it is when you do get that amazing weather, you get that great light, the great texture in the clouds, the weather helps tell a story, and everything comes together. There's nothing quite like that moment. It's so very magical when it happens. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your strategies for dealing with weather. How do you stay productive if the weather isn't going your way? Is there something that you try to pivot to do something different with your photography when you're not getting the weather that you want?
Well, I think most of my photography is I always call it's experiential, and that my motivation in being out anywhere is always having an experience. And the photography kind of is just a thing to do during an experience. It's a great thing to do. It can help shape my experiences, and it obviously records those experiences for, you know, I can remember them later when I go and look back at the photos. But yeah, I'm never too worried about when I'm out not getting the conditions I want for photography because I'm out there to have the experience first. So I'm on a hike or I'm traveling to a part of the world I haven't been before, or um, you know, I'm up in the mountains in the winter, or I'm down on the coast or in a fjord on a totally clear blue glass sort of day like this one. So the experience is first. And if no photos come out of that experience, there's always a great experience to be had. But when you're out having that experience and something does strike me as photogenic, then that's just the kind of the icing on the cake for me. So whether it's, that mountain with those clouds, that was a brief moment. Those clouds formed and went away. That light was not there most of the days that we were in that part of Norway. It was just that moment of time. And then the clouds were even a smaller moment of time. And I was really glad for that. But had that not happened, that whole day, of which this was the one photo, was an amazing day. And I have great memories of that entire day. And this photo brings back those memories, even though most of those other moments didn't produce photographs. And like a lot of those other photos you were just showing, yeah, there are all those moments where the photograph came together. But yeah, even without the photographs, even if I hadn't taken my camera, like being there at that moment in the San Juan Islands with that light and those waves and the lighthouse, what a great thing to be doing for that period of time in my day and in my life.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this photo just demonstrates how weather can totally transform a scene and really bring it to life and really tell a story. I think the clouds are definitely adding some color and texture to the sky, some shapes that are interesting that relate to the shapes in the landscape below, and just those crashing waves. Just everything is perfect. And I look at a scene like this, and I'm thinking that this might be a little difficult when you're trying to set your exposure. We've got a question here from the audience. How important is the histogram to you? And I think maybe if I could rephrase the question, when you're working with a scene like this that's got a lot of contrast between light and shadow, you've got these really bright areas. What's your approach to exposure?
So the histogram, yeah, I follow the histogram for sure. People ask me about what metering mode do you use, or how do you know to get the right exposure? And I say it's all in the histogram. And for me, the most important piece are those highlights, and especially in this situation, we've got bright sun illuminating, the sprays in the water and on the clouds. And so my main goal is to not overexpose those, not clip those highlights, because once that's done, they're not coming back. Then the rest of the scene, the shadows and the midtones all fall where they fall. But that right side of the histogram where the highlights are, that's my number one priority. In some scenes where nothing's moving, nothing's changing, obviously you can experiment more with different exposure values and even, bracket exposures and exposure blend or whatever you're going to do to try to maintain the dynamic range and get the detail all throughout the scene. But in a situation like that, where those waves are crashing, you've got to, you get one exposure really. And so, yeah, the highlights. And then with today's cameras, fortunately, and software and the ability to do noise removal and things, even if I had very deep shadows in that scene when I was exposing for those highlights, you can really bring a lot of shadow detail out with great quality. So yeah, the dark end of my histogram is less of a concern for me these days than it used to be. So histogram is what I'm following. I don't care about what metering mode I'm using. As long as I'm not clipping the highlights in a scene like this, then I'm pretty sure I can, work with the rest of it.
We got a question from Alice about whether you are using a neutral density filter for a shot like this to lengthen your exposure time to get that, I'm presuming about maybe 1/8 of a second here, 1/4 of a second to blur the waves as they strike the rocks.
I love that. You can just call shutter speeds just off the top of your head like that by looking at the photo. Yeah, I think that's probably about exactly where that was, probably 1/4 of a second-ish.
Mm.
And I don't remember in this particular photo, but obviously some pretty bright light. So to get that short or that duration of a shutter speed, 1/4 of a second, may have required a neutral density filter. I carry ND filters with me all the time. And if I'm going for a particular look or a feel in things that are moving, I'll use ND as needed to get the shutter speed. But you can, obviously, it's multiple things that you can do to affect your shutter speed. I'll stop down the aperture if I need to. I'll go to a lower ISO. Obviously, I shoot at ISO 100 on my Canon camera. That's kind of the base ISO that works. But I can go to ISO 50, which will kind of lengthen out those shutter speeds a little bit. And combination between neutral density, aperture, and ISO to get the shutter speed that I need to get the look that I want. And yeah, whatever that ends up being is what it is. There's no exact formula. Well, actually, there are exact formulas. I never know what it is. I'm just trying different things until I take a photo and think, yeah, that looks good. That's what I'm going for.
Oh, we got a really interesting question from Giovanni. He says that when he visits a location and he tries out different compositions or he tests different lenses for a spot, he often feels that it's the last shot that he takes that's usually the best one in the whole series. And I find that interesting because this makes me think about something that, once again, my good friend and mentor, George Stocking, says. He says, you got to work the seat. And that means you kind of start off with what you think is going to be a good composition. And then if it's great, then you can keep going. But if it's not quite right, you just keep on trying different variations. You keep on working one shot leading to the next until you figure everything out. And then the culmination of this effort should be that the final photos you're taking are the best ones. Though I find personally that probably half of the time, the very first shot that I took ends up being the best one, that I had something good and then I keep trying to make it better. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But I go through this process anyways. What about you? What do you feel like? Do you feel like that you kind of work your way towards a better shot, or are your instincts telling you the right thing when you first set up?
I think all of it's true. I definitely, I think working the scene or, moving around and as I was talking about earlier, really exploring the space that you're in, noticing different perspectives and angles and what the light's doing and all of that stuff is essential to do. Certainly sometimes you walk onto a spot and the first thing that occurs to you where you take your first photo is the one. And as you explore around, you don't find something that works better than that. So I have that experience, but I also have the experience. This would be a great example where it is more, it took a long time to get to that spot where things really are interesting. So this is in Colorado, near Ridgeway, Colorado, up in the mountains in fall there, Chimney Rock in the background. And I've been photographing Chimney Rock from lots of different perspectives. And I went into the aspen forest and I wanted to find, was there a place I could get a window through? And I did a lot of searching and searching and searching. And I finally found this window through the aspen canopy with the rock framed in the background. And yeah, that was a long project to find that. And this was probably about the last photo I took. And even this, I wasn't entirely happy with it. There's still kind of that open blank spot on the right. I would love if that had also been filled in with aspen leaves. But of all the searching I did, this was the best spot that I found, and it was a process.
Well, Michael points out that the leaves going around the mountain in the background are forming a heart shape. And now
Exactly.
that I've seen the heart, I can't unsee it.
Yeah. And that was kind of me as well. Yeah, it was that heart shape. And I don't know, it's a little kitschy in some ways, but that's the shape it was. And I went with it. But I definitely saw it as well. Yeah. And so it was really a fun little find and was an adventure. I mean, I was hiking around on a hillside and venturing way off of the path to get to here. I was hoping that I would find my way back successfully. And just even the tripod setup, I was on a very steep slope and kind of sliding down the hill. And yeah, the whole process was fun. And had it not lined up like this, and I hadn't found this photo, it gets back to that idea of the experience. I was exploring the forest in this beautiful fall color on this beautiful day out in the mountains of Colorado. And just that experience of being out there was great. And the fact that in this case, I happened to take a photo that I felt was a little different was icing on the cake.
We've got some questions about this photo. It's sparking a lot of conversation. Felix wants to
Oh,
know whether you focus stack this picture. And then Eileen has a related question. Are you blending several shots at different aperture settings for this? Though maybe she means different focal lengths as well.
yeah. No, this one is a single photo, one frame in the camera, not a focus stack because I only focus stack. I mean, for me, anytime I can simplify my process in terms of what I'm going to have to do, both taking the photo and then developing the photo later on, the simplest thing that's going to get me the quality I want is what I do. So in that situation, none of the elements in the scene are close to my camera lens. The trees on the left there, or maybe the one on the right, they're both about similar distance. They're probably 30 feet away from the front of my camera. And so at that distance for the closest thing, you can find an aperture, probably in this case, I'm thinking like f16, that has plenty of depth of field for the whole scene. So from those trees all the way to the mountain in the background, everything's sharp. No need to focus stack, in my opinion. I don't know that you would gain anything from focus stacking. That's focus stacking just creates a challenge later on, and also a challenge when you're taking it to get all the frames correct. And if anything's moving, leaves in the wind or whatever, that makes it hard, if not impossible, to get the focus stack to come out. But if I had something, a flower that was 6 inches from my lens, there isn't an aperture that I could get that subject 6 inches from the lens and the mountain 2 miles from the lens, all in focus in one aperture. So then focus stacking becomes necessary. But if it's not necessary, I'm not doing it. And also the light was perfect in terms of dynamic range. It was low, subtle, soft light coming through, fit great in one frame, no high dynamic range, no need to bracket anything. So yeah, one shot.
What about the autumn stream shot that we looked at before? Did you focus stack that or is that a single shot?
That one was, I think, also a single shot. Even though that foreground was closer, it probably wasn't as close as it appears. I still was up, probably head height on my tripod, with a
Yeah, you
wide
can tell that
angle.
you were still several feet away from the foreground.
Yeah, so that rock with the little leaves on it there on the right is still probably 6, 7, 8 feet away from my lens, which is, maybe f18 I had to go to, is still far enough away that everything's within the plane of focus back there.
Yeah. All right. So this is a spot that I recognize.
Yeah, you've probably been here many times, I imagine.
Yeah, many, many times. Leprechaun Canyon in Utah, that's where this is. And
It
it is a
is.
beautiful canyon. I love it. It's a really interesting, unique slot canyon. But I think there's like basically 2 or 3 different compositions there that actually work. And so it's kind of a one-trick pony. And so I've been there like I'm afraid with maybe 20 times. And so I've photographed every angle you can possibly imagine. And like this particular angle by far is my favorite.
Oh, and I see, that's awesome. I love that because this is that thing of, the photographer eye and finding, when things work, they work. And so you've been there many times, you've searched that canyon, what's there, and this is what works for you. I'd never been, this is the only time I've ever been there. And I'd also not seen any photos of it before, or at least not. I mean, I think I probably at some point went on, Google Images just to see, oh, is it worth going in there, just on my phone that day. But I don't know that I ever knew that this particular perspective was up there, but that's where I ended up, So I think, certain things just work in landscape photography. And yeah, those of us who do landscape photography and are looking for certain elements probably end up in the same place taking similar photos. But yeah, it was a beautiful canyon. But you're right, that was the spot where kind of the light, the lines, everything just kind of came together into a photo that I thought was compelling.
Yeah, and I think that's very true that, a lot of us who do this, we see things in very similar ways. And, part of that is that landscape photography is pretty rigidly defined. Ever since Ansel Adams popularized the genre, I don't think landscape photography has really changed that much. It's like, uh, the landscape photos seem to have this basic formula, like, and I think this photo shows it very clearly, foreground versus background, that near far juxtaposition, everything is sharply in focus, that deep focus effect, shooting during the magic hour, sunrise, sunset, and twilight. And so we all tend to do that a lot. And that I think leads us to very similar results. But even working within this very specifically defined genre, there's still a lot of room for creative interpretation. And so it never ceases to amaze me how often we see the world in a similar way and how
hmm
often we see it in a completely different way. Tell us a little bit more about this shot.
So this is near where I live in Southern Oregon. That's Mount McLaughlin, and this is Lake of the Woods. And Lake of the Woods is it's in the summer, it's a very popular spot for boaters, and there's cabins and all that kind of stuff. And I think you can see there's a lodge that's you can see on the right on the shoreline back in the distance there. But in the winter, the lake free on a good winter out here. We don't get the cold winters of the Northeast always. But when it's a cold enough winter, the lake will ice over. And I just happened to go up this one morning in the early winter when the icing over process was still happening. So ice was, you know, covering part of the lake near to the shore, but then there was a big open area where it hadn't iced over yet. And so I was snowshoeing along the lake shore, just looking for I didn't know what I would find, but the spot, just it came together, like you said. Certain themes in landscape photography just seem to work, and I think we end up with, on the one hand, yeah, there's a lot of similarities, but I'm okay with that because those are the things that help communicate. Again, I'm coming back to that word, the experience in a photo. So one of my frustrations when I started photography was my photos don't really communicate to anyone what my experience was like. People look at the photo and go, okay, great. You were, yeah, there's a mountain or there's flowers or whatever. The photo isn't really moving me. And I'm like, yeah, but when I was there, I was really being moved by this experience. So I think those certain key elements, like you said, kind of having some interest in the foreground, having something to look at further in the distance, having interesting lighting, color, lines that bring you through the scene. Those are all the things that make someone viewing a photo get a sense of what that experience might have been like. And here, these lupin in the coastal range mountains of Northern California, they're beautiful. And every time I go there, when the lupin are blooming, regardless of the exact conditions, it's really amazing. But I have a lot of photos there that people go, oh yeah, interesting flowers. But it was, this light, this alignment, that halo around the sun, looking directly into the sun as the sun was setting, that to me made a photo that could make someone just viewing the photo go, wow, where is that? What is going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this photo really conveys the experience very well. I mean, I know when I look at it, I feel like I've been transported into the scene, like I'm there looking over your shoulder. And so not only am I transported into the experience that you had, I'm also transported into your creative vision with this shot. And that's a combination of composition, visually inviting the viewer into the scene, using that foreground, for example, to give the viewer like a path, stepping stones that invites them to connect on a deeper level. And I think part of it is also that it's telling a story, that you captured this unique moment where you had the halo in the sky. And, that's something that really intrigues the viewer. And I think it helps forge an emotional connection. And I see that in so many of your photos, just that mix of that visual invitation and that storytelling, that mood, that magic of the moment that's been captured. And, a photo like this, for example, I think is a good example of creative use of mood. Like the composition in this is good. It's not like the kind of composition that hits you over the head, right? It's a subtle composition. But what does hit you over the head is the mood. I mean, the color is nice, but the color is understated as well. But the mood that you've created here is what really draws you in. So tell us a little bit about this and what you did to create this magical mood.
Well, fortunately, most of this magical mood was created for me. This is again in Southern Oregon, not too far from where I live. In the fall, just driving up forest roads, jeep roads up into the mountains, and just seeing what I see. And I went through this area of forest where there was very thin little wisps of fog that were blowing through. So it wasn't heavy fog, and it would come and go. And this particular forest was it's second growth, so it's been replanted. It wasn't like really organized old growth forests like sometimes in the redwoods, where all the compositions can really fall together. This was really challenging. So this is another one of those situations where I really hiked around, chased the fog as it was coming and going, and really searched for something that had some organization to it. And this was the best I found. And even still at the time, those two trees right in the middle in the foreground, I didn't love, but that was the best I could find. I was standing with my tripod on top of a stump. And there was the only place I could even get that perspective, because if I moved to anywhere, I was off the stump and down in the brush. But the colors and that fog and the light were just so compelling to me. I figured whatever happens with the composition is kind of in some ways secondary. And now I even though they are kind of a visual block, those two trunks don't bother me so much anymore because they're different and maybe not what you would expect.
Well, we've reached pretty much the end of our time here. So if anyone has any last minute questions for Sean, please put them in the chat. And while we wrap things up quickly, we'll see if any questions come in. But, as I said earlier, Sean, I just love the way you capture mood in your photos. I love that you're not afraid to work with more subtle compositions and subtle light. I think too often landscape photographers are just trying to beat people over the head with epic awesomeness all the time. And I think that you tell a more effective story. You build kind of a longer term relationship with your viewers when you're not doing that, because I think that that has impact immediately. That might be something that people notice on Instagram, but it's not really going to draw people in over the long term. And so I think that what you're doing, working with these subtle compositions, these subtle moments and light and color, you're telling more of a story. You're inviting the viewer in for that longer conversation. And I really love that.
Thanks, Ian. I appreciate that. And I would say I feel the same way about your photography as well.
Sean, thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure talking with you. I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks a lot, Ian.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.